What if what you call spirituality is just a graceful disguise for the pain you still refuse to feel? In a village where leaves were listened to more than speeches, there lived a man called Reverse. He wasn't old, nor young, just someone who had tried every road and still felt a hollow space where peace was supposed to live. He didn't pray, didn't meditate, didn't seek enlightenment. But every night, before sleep, he placed a glass of water by his bed and whispered, "Show me what I'm still not seeing." Reverse wasn't trying to escape. He wanted to understand why so many silenced themselves not to listen, but to hide. In that village, some meditated until they disappeared. Some chanted mantras while avoiding their own reflection. Some said gratitude while denying their grief. And that hurt him more than pain itself. The abandonment of the real in the name of the ideal. One moonless night, everything shifted. He awoke to the sound of water dripping into the glass. There was no leak, no rain. Yet drop by drop, the glass wept what he hadn't yet named. He stood, cupped it in both hands, and drank. In that sip, something gave way, not outside, but inside. For the first time, he felt his soul, not as light, but as something dense, moist, earthen, somewhere between a sigh and an ancient scream. It didn't ask for transcendence. It asked for ground, because reconnecting with the soul isn't rising above. It's returning to the exact place where you stopped being whole. The soul doesn't whisper to those who flee. It waits until the body is too tired to keep pretending. In the days that followed, Reverse didn't seek signs, but they came. A mirror cracked on its own. A candle blew out too soon. A bird that always landed on the same branch never returned. Everything seemed to be speaking to him, softly. And instead of interpreting, he simply sat. On the floor, no cushion, no incense, no method. There he felt what he had avoided: boredom, discomfort, painful memories uninvited. He didn't chase them away, let them drift through the house like old wind. Sometimes he cried, sometimes just felt a weight on his shoulders with no name. And slowly, he began to suspect that might be the soul, finally returning. Reverse started collecting what others overlooked: a stained stone, a pierced leaf, a bit of rope. He kept them in a rusted tin box, as if broken objects held entire languages. When he opened the box, it smelled of time. And it felt like each piece was saying, "I'm here because you saw me." In the village, people began calling him strange. He smiled, not with pride, but because he no longer needed to fit. He was coming back to himself without going anywhere. Because reconnecting with the soul doesn't take technique. It takes presence. And the courage to let discomfort sit beside you, uninvited. You don't need to climb mountains to find your soul. It lives where you stopped looking. Reverse began visiting a wooden bench behind the abandoned chapel. He didn't pray, didn't ask, just sat. Sometimes the wind carried away the words he never said. Other times, silence offered answers he wasn't ready to hear. Still, he stayed. One day, a child sat nearby, drawing spirals in the dirt. She said nothing, just handed him a piece of broken chalk. Reverse took it, and without thinking, drew a crooked line in the soil. The child smiled, like someone recognizing the moment another finally heard themselves from the inside. Then she left. That night, he lit a candle inside the tin box. Not for light, but for witness. He let the flame warm the broken objects for a few minutes, then blew it out with the gentlest breath he'd ever released. The scent that lingered was the same one from the day he buried his father: wet earth and cheap incense. His throat closed, but he didn't resist. He knew. That memory wasn't punishment. It was invitation. The next morning, he didn't meditate. He simply stared at a dried leaf on the table for an hour. In it, he saw more movement than in any retreat. And for the first time, he understood. He didn't need to silence his thoughts. He needed to listen to what they were trying to protect. Because the soul doesn't speak to those who silence it. It blooms in those brave enough to stay with what they feel. Not every soul is lost. Some are just tired of not being felt. Reverse started walking behind houses along paths no one used. He found forgotten things, A single shoe, a toy with no owner, a cracked teacup. He didn't take them, just stood before each like keeping vigil, whispered, "I see you." One afternoon he found an old woman sitting beside the well. She didn't meditate either, just stared into the water like someone who knows depth reveals itself only with time. He sat beside her. They spoke no words, but they shared silence like bread. The next day he returned to the wooden bench behind the chapel. There, an envelope with his name. Inside, a fragment of mirror wrapped in cloth. No note, no explanation, just reflection. And in it, something he hadn't seen in years. Tenderness. It wasn't an enlightened gaze. It was a tired one, but present. One that said, "I'm still here." He placed the mirror in the tin box among the other fragments, and for the first time that box no longer felt like a container for leftovers. It felt like an altar. Because reconnecting with the soul isn't returning to who you were, it's remembering with tenderness who you never stopped being. Sometimes it's not the soul that hides, it's you speaking too loudly to hear it. On the fifth night, Reverse woke with a strange feeling. The air inside the house was thicker, like it breathed alongside him. He found the tin box open in the middle of the room. He didn't remember leaving it there. Inside, the objects were arranged in a circle. In the center, on the mirror shard. He sat beside it and lit a candle, not to search, just to be. A soft sound filled the space like a prayer without words, not from outside, from within. The sound of the body remembering how to become a home. The next morning, he drew a spiral in the dirt floor. He traced each curve with a dry branch, whispering a word that had come in a dream. Stay. He remained there for hours, until the sun shifted, until his body warmed, until time fell silent. People in the village began to notice. It wasn't a glow, not peace. It was presence, the kind that doesn't need explanation. Some asked what he'd been doing. He only smiled, because what he did had no name. It was made of listening, waiting, surrender. That morning, he opened the kitchen window, held the box in both hands and said, "Thank you for waiting for me." The box didn't answer, but just as he placed it on the ground, a leaf fell into it, from nowhere. Or maybe, from within. Because the soul returns not when you demand it, but when you treat it as a guest that never stopped knocking. The soul once welcomed begins to grow beyond the body. Reverse began tending to his home like a sacred field. He didn't clean to tidy, he cleaned to listen. Every object had its place like a note in a forgotten song. He started leaving small notes in the cracks. Don't run. Stay whole. Listen with your chest. They weren't reminders, they were seeds. A child from the village began to visit. She didn't speak, just sat on the doorstep with a handful of stones. Reverse offered tea, she accepted. They stayed there, wordless, full. One day, she handed him a stone with a hole through its center. "It's where the soul passes through," she said. And he believed her. He placed the stone at the center of the spiral on the floor. Around it, the fragments from the tin box, as if they'd waited for this moment. For the first time, he made something like a ritual. But there was no incense, no soft music, only truth. And truth needs no stage. That night, the candle that always went out early burned to the end. Just before extinguishing, it flared, as if saying, "Now you are whole in what can't be seen." Because reconnecting with the soul isn't about going within. It's about staying present in the world without leaving yourself behind. You don't need to understand your soul, only let it stay. On the morning of the seventh day, Reverse woke to the sound of his own name inside his chest. Not a voice, a presence. He lit a candle before sunrise, placed the tin box on the table, and looked at each fragment with the eyes of someone who finally recognizes an open map. He opened the window and let the wind move through the house. A piece of paper floated onto the mirror. He didn't open it. just slid it into a crack in the wall, offering the invisible a place to live. He sat on the floor beside the faded spiral, hands over heart. He cried, not in sorrow, but like someone who finally had found shelter. Outside, the village remained quiet, but something had shifted. Now his door was always slightly ajar, and those who passed by felt, without knowing why, that inside lived a listening, not an answer, a listening. On the living room wall, the child had written in charcoal, "Here, the soul doesn't need to run." He didn't erase it, didn't frame it, just let it be. And when night arrived, he lay down on the floor among the seeds and fragments, and for the first time slept in peace, because reconnecting with the soul isn't a destination. It's the moment you stop postponing yourself. If any part of you is still running, even in silence, sit. The soul never left. Follow the hush on the hidden path,